How do you design an end-to-end ecosystem-based procurement operating model? Well, that's the question we'll be asking over the course of this special 4-part series, Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement, in partnership with WNS Denali. And in each episode, we'll speak with WNS Denali experts to discuss the basics of an ecosystem approach, and then dig into specifics across category management, source to contract, and procure to pay processes. And in this first episode, I'm joined by Satyen Pathak, Vice President of Solutions and Capabilities, and Lynn Rideout, Vice President of Global Category Advisory, both at WNS Denali. We'll focus on how to start planning an ecosystem approach to procurement. And so let's start, Satyen, by asking you, what do we mean when we talk about an ecosystem approach to procurement?
Great question to kick off, Phil. This has been focus for us for past few years. And in a nutshell, what it means is that when you're looking at any transformation, any problem, any challenge, we need to take into account the entire procurement ecosystem, the impact, the challenges, and consequently your solution will have on every member and every component of the solution. And let's see what we mean by that. Then, if you look at the procurement ecosystem, you've got the procurement team itself, right? CPO,
Yeah.
category managers, buyers, other roles like analysts and P2P desk. Then you've got key stakeholders, right? Like internal business stakeholders like manufacturing plants, IT, marketing, HR. And then you've got external ones like suppliers and in some cases customers. Then comes your infrastructure, right? Your policies, your processes, your technology, all that. And then flowing through that is your data and information, whereas purchase orders, invoices, RFXs, supplier queries, analysis, market intelligence, and then finally, providing that support is organization design.
Yeah.
What we really look for is when we are tackling any challenge or any transformation, one needs to really look at all the elements of procurement ecosystem and the interaction it will have. And it's, as you can see, it's pretty complex, and one
Right.
needs to be aware of all these interactions that it will have. And it's not so much of butterfly flapping its wing in Beijing and weather changing in New York, but it's pretty complex. And that's the reason why we look at this, because it's highly connected, interactive, and complex ecosystem.
I think one of the important things to raise there, and you said it right at the beginning, was all the different stakeholder groups. As procurement, we can sometimes have fingers pointed at us to say we only look within a specific stakeholder or we look at ourselves, and we don't take into account the big picture. But actually, when you mentioned around who are all the stakeholders can be internal stakeholders, it can be a team, but really importantly, it can be customers, it can be members of your local community, it can be even broader than that. So it's not just about looking at a closed approach where it's folks that are closest to you that you touch every day.
Exactly.
Now, when you are trying to understand the current situation that an organization has, in terms of how all these pieces are connecting together, what do you do? Where do you start? Where do you baseline the current situation from?
Yeah, another great question. So, what we try to do, Phil, is take a bit of a structured approach in understanding client's current situation, because many a times you really don't have a lot of time to come to a solution to propose.
Mhm.
So we structure it in three layers, right? First is we try to understand where they are. Second, where do they really want to go and what kind of objectives do they want to achieve? And then lastly, what challenges they might face or what accelerators they might have that will accelerate that process of reaching their objectives. Let's look at each of them in a little bit detail. So, understanding where they are, and that's where the ecosystem approach comes in. You start at the foundation, which is your data layer. You've got purchase order volumes,
Mhm.
RFXs, invoices, all that. Then comes your organizational layer. You understand your organization design, stakeholders, their role, procurement processes, and a host of other things. And then lastly and importantly, you understand the strategic aspect, where what's procurement's charter, what is their goal, what do they want to achieve both in short term as well as long term. And then Rounding all that up is the cultural aspect of the organization. What's the appetite for change? What is procurement's perceived role in the organization?
Hmm.
Are they strategic enough? Taking all that into account is when you start to formulate the first answer to the first question is where they are. Then comes the second question is where do they want to go? And you try to understand what objectives they want to achieve, what's the, both at a strategic level as well as at the operating level. And it may not be as obvious as one would think. Typically savings has always been the objective for procurement organizations. More spend management has always been. But as we have seen recently, talent and capacity is becoming a big challenge. So that objectives and where they want to go has always been a moving target. And while one needs to understand it, one needs to also keep in mind that that's going to evolve. And then lastly, and very importantly, one needs to understand what challenges they might face in either either not achieving the goal or delaying the goal. And
Hmm.
then on the other hand, you might have some accelerators, in-flight projects that might make that transformation faster. For example, any large technology transformation project that procurement organization is undertaking is going to consume significant organizational resources. So one needs to be aware that any new project that you might want to think of will need to factor that in. At the same time, once that technology transformation is complete, that can accelerate any other transformation.
Now, we've talked a lot about the stakeholders, and we mentioned that in the last question as well. But Lynn, I wanted to bring you in and ask a question around how we actually get information and insights from those that we're looking to serve in terms of understanding from their perspectives what should be changed or what perhaps hasn't been working well for them in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could talk to you, for a while about here's the project plans, here's exactly what the communication, chart matrix, change process should look like. But I think most importantly, it's really just engaging very deliberately with multiple layers in the organization. And to your point, stakeholder can be broadly, the business stakeholders. If you're doing a category management transformation, I'd say that's almost, essential and critical. It can be suppliers, depending on what touch points they might have. And I think really I focus a lot on the value of that touch point. So not only are you kind of trying to come in and accomplish your goals, did we communicate with them? Did we engage? Did we, tell them what we're going to do? But really actively listening and taking every opportunity to build the trust and the rapport with the wider stakeholder group. I think it's just so important. If change is going to really stick, if we're going to do this well, it has to be that every individual is prepared for it. So when we're gleaning information and we're trying to pull out what we need, what is your spend? How does it work? What are your suppliers? How often do you run projects? All of those, kind of bread and butter questions that we have in this this type of solutioning that we would do. It is also saying what really keeps you awake at night and what would good look like to you and what are your objectives, and trying to just make sure we kind of have that continuous feedback loop, because sometimes we get surprised. Sometimes we think, that the bottleneck is at the, top decision maker level, one thing. It might be, gosh, we just don't have the right digital tools to do this. But what we really kind of find out when we dig deeper is we really don't know how to talk to our stakeholders, or they're not giving us time, or whatever the case might be. So I know it sounds overly simplified, but active listening and taking every opportunity to build that rapport while getting the information we need is, to me, one of the most important things.
Some of the things I've seen is even the stakeholders you may have labeled as being difficult are the ones that are resistant to change. Actually, when you start talking and listening, I won't say everybody, but the vast majority of folks are really open to driving change because ultimately they want to do what's the best for the business. So it may just be that there hasn't been an environment for them to succeed or to communicate that with you in the past. Once you start encouraging and engaging with folks, whether it's focus groups or making them feel as though they're part of the process, I think that's really important and valuable to ultimately driving the change that you want to see.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And some of my favorite success stories are the people who the very first conversation I have with them are basically like, please don't talk to me. I don't want this to happen.
Right.
But quickly become the people who eventually feel listened to and go, oh my gosh, that's actually better. This wasn't awful. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Satyen, as you're looking across various different organizations, which I know you do all the time, I think a lot of organizations will say, well, we're different because of this reason or that reason. And sometimes that's true. Other times, there's a lot of similarities between businesses. So how do you go from looking at how do we pull all this together and how do we map it all together? What helps determine or decide if something is the best fit for one situation versus another situation? How do you take all that into account?
I think to begin with, Phil, as we talked about the three factors and three parameters we mentioned, they really form the foundation of good solution, right? Understanding client situation well. And as Lynn pointed out, becoming trusted advisor quickly helps us significantly on that front. But at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, one size fits all approach really doesn't work. So you really need to create a customized solution. And that customized solution has two dimensions to it. One is from client A to client B, the solution will not be same. But at the same time, even for client A, the solution of today may not be the one for tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So when you are creating, especially medium and long-term plans, you need to take into account the variability and the volatility of the current situation. We are all aware of the supply chain challenges we are having. We are all aware of the talent crunch. So like if 3 years back, if we had talked about this subject, talent wouldn't have talent crunch at least wouldn't have figured as a top challenges, right? But right now, that's really top of the mind, front and center of all the conversations we end up having. So really having that perspective helps tremendously, and that's where building a customized and agile solution becomes important. So as long as we keep these things in mind and meet clients' said and unsaid needs, I think the solution kind of fits well with the client situation.
When you were thinking about solutioning an operating model to support what a client needs and wanting to build that flexibility in, are you looking at that from very specific things in the operating model that allow and enable flexibility? Or are you looking at it from a governance perspective to say, well, we're continually going to be ensuring that what has been built in the operating model has been built as fit for purpose? Or are you looking at it from both perspectives? I'm really interested in where you would focus. Is it the design of the operating model itself? Or is it making sure that you're always on top to reevaluate to make sure that it continues to be fit for purpose?
Yeah, I think you rightly said that. I think we need to look at both and maybe even more factors. So, operating model, of course, you need to create that robust operating model which will be flexible enough to take into account any changes. So, whether it's a resource model, org design, technology strategy, implementation plans, the host of things. And at the same time, you need to have that governance which will make sure that that flexibility is not just built in at the beginning but gets executed as you are getting engaged more and more. Even during our solution process, that becomes true. So let me give you an example, Phil. For one of the clients, the obvious challenge or obvious objective was savings maximization. But as we started to peel the onion, we realized that even before we looked at savings, we had to address the data and visibility challenge. The important information required to achieve those and maximization of saving were really simply not there. So when we engaged with them and they started building the trust with us, we designed a solution that first addressed the data and visibility problem. It addressed the PO compliance issue, which actually facilitated the data, and then we created a sourcing solution which maximized the savings. So really, you need to have that understanding of the client as well as flexibility to be able to address the right problem and create, as I said, a solution that met explicit and implicit needs.
Lynn, I want to wrap up by asking you a pretty simple question, but I think it's also really important. When folks set out on the start of this journey to build a fit-for-purpose ecosystem around their procurement organization, what does success look like? Is there any one such determinant of what success looks like?
I think if you want to oversimplify the success criteria, to me, success is any time a solution absolutely addresses the need that the organization had. That that's something I get excited about in that success. And it can be very, very small. It can be as simple as I need, 3 resources to review my contracts and think about whether or not I have the right clauses in this section of my contract. Or it can start, as simple as, can you help one of my team members do a category plan for the first time? And then it can grow from there and evolve, because we're solving one challenge at a time and continue to flexibly adapt and evolve. It can start, with success being a very big approach where it's global and it's transitioning from another way of doing things, and it is all of the processes all at once, and that can be very complex. And it ties back to that ecosystem of you have to think about all of the dependencies and how to lift and shift and make some of those changes happen. So success has different sizes, different flavors to it, but I think the critical part is it solves the specific need, not just the need we think it is, and it brings something that can flex and adapt. And really give a client organization what they're looking for. So it's purposefully built with a point of view, but it allows for the organization, the client organization itself to embed their own culture and true objectives into it as it goes.
Thanks for listening in to today's episode, part of our 4-podcast series called Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement in partnership with WNS Denali. To listen back to the entire series, go to artofprocurement.com/ecosystem series. That's all one word. That's artofprocurement.com/ecosystem